Um, so we're going to be talking about spending less without restriction. And in a larger sense, we're going to be talking about where restriction doesn't work. I don't know if you can see my sign, but according to my sign, restriction is, you know what. So we're going to be talking about restriction itself. I might as well just start the slides if I'm just going to start doing slides. So let's pop over here. So I call this the poverty of restriction just because restriction tends to send us be a result of poverty. And it also sends us into some poverty, not necessarily financial poverty, but the poverty of our mindset. It's still very hot. So our class objectives tonight is we're going to try to deeply understand why restriction does not work and how we can spend less without restriction and still make good financial decisions. We're going to discuss some of the negative outcomes of using restriction. And we're going to talk about 2 quick wins. So 2 little tiny tools that you could just pick up and use right this second. And assuming we have time, 1 longer term practice that once mastered will make it so you don't need restriction. And we're just going to play a game with that too. So we've been basically lied to for generations now about restriction. In all of its forms, restriction tells us the lie that there's a correct choice to be made, right? It tells us there's a good and a bad choice. You just have to figure that out. You have to be smart enough, work harder, work smarter, be more productive to figure out the correct choice. Restriction is often the only tool that we've been given, and we've been given it millions and millions of times. You probably got restriction messages as a kid, definitely as a young adult. And then we reinforce those same messages that being restriction is equivalent to being responsible. Restriction is often the only tool that we've been given for quote unquote responsible behavior. So of course, if it's the only tool you've been given, it's the only tool you'll be able to use. Restriction looks logical. It looks again like we're making the correct choice, but it is deeply, deeply emotional and reactive. Restriction teaches us failure and inconsistency, which was kind of what we were using restriction to try to prevent. So we're going to use this child here. So think about a random 4-year-old who's having a lovely day at the beach. This random 4-year-old, it is time to go. So you say to this child, hello, child, it is time for us to go now. Please go get in the car. And the child responds with this, right? And you, as parent, of course, you have many other things to do with your time. And this child is being this child right now. And so after a while of cajoling and trying to reason with this fired up 4-year-old, you pick this child up and you throw them bodily into the back of the car. We are using, for our example here, a 1970s Plymouth Fury station wagon. And the reason we're using is that is the very car that I was thrown into the back of multiple times as a child myself. I couldn't find a picture of myself being a brat. I probably should have just asked my mom. So this is what happens, right? So we, as parents, as adults, we sometimes have to force or restrict the children in us, children around us, our children, sorry. So what happens is in a time in our lives when we should have been learning how to regulate ourselves, we learned and internalized a message, even from very well-meaning parents, that the only way that I can get things done is to be forced. That's the message that we get. This is the lesson that we learn. And then we have lots of data to support this. I'm 51 years old and I can look back through my entire life and think about all the times I needed to be forced in order to get stuff done. Whether that's an external force, like something coming from the outside to pressure me, a situation, a person, or internally pressuring or forcing myself. So we have a lot of history with ourselves, and we can remember a lot of times like, this is the only way that I can get things done is to pressure myself. And again, you're going to hear this. This is our chorus for the day. This is the hook, because it's the only tool you've ever been given. It's the only tool you can use. So restriction goes by a bunch of different names, limitations, force, obligation, accountability, control, that kind of a thing. All of that kind of boils down to this kind of language. This is how I hear it in my clients. I just need to buy what I need, not what I want. We're going to hold off. I could have about a 2-hour rant about why I do not like the wants versus needs strategy, but I will, I will, you don't need this today. Another one is I just have to buckle down, right? I don't have a choice, do I? I have to. That's the pressure. And the other one is I'm only focused on this right now. That kind of hyper focus that we're pressuring ourselves and focusing on one thing. So let's talk about what restriction does to our brains. And we're going to be using a tool that is taught in the social worker world. This comes from a book that I believe is called Working with Involuntary Clients. And of course, this comes along with a story too. About 1 million years ago, I worked through a nonprofit that had an MSW, a social worker on staff. And the social worker one day like grabbed me by the ear and sat me down and said, you need to know about this. What she wanted me to understand is that there's a big difference between me working with my voluntary clients who reach out to me, voluntary show up for sessions, pay me. There's a difference between working with that kind of folks and working with folks who are not there truly voluntarily. Yes, they signed up for a program, but I was acting as a barrier. So they had to meet with Hannah, the financial coach, like 3 times before they could get a housing voucher or something like that, right? So they weren't truly voluntary clients. And she needed me to understand that there was going to be some predictable things that I could see out of that. So we're going to be talking about what they call the consent continuum. We talk about consent in a lot these days in the world of the bedroom, right? And we should be talking about consent in that world, but we should probably be talking about consent in lots and lots of other parts of our lives too. Consent is only this green squoval here. This consent is freely given, it's revocable. We give consent in the full knowledge of consequences, processes, risks, values of that choice. If you take one step off of consent, we're into something called compliance. And compliance is where we're reluctantly engaging in an activity, which is still not consent, even if we're choosing to do it with reluctance. That's not consent. When we're engaging in an activity in order to please or not disappoint somebody else. So we're leveraging somebody else's opinion, or we're leveraging a kind of embarrassment against ourselves. I'm sure that you've seen, especially around the first of the year, people may be posting on social media, 2024 is the year that I work out 5 days a week. The reason that they are making that public declaration is they're trying to leverage, weaponize the potential for embarrassment against themselves to hold themselves quote unquote accountable, right? So that's still compliance. Take one step off of compliance and we're into pressure. And pressure, again, we are engaging in an activity reluctantly through the use of bribery, punishment, shame, judgment, manipulation, implied threats, a sense of duty or responsibility. And lots of work tasks live here, right? And lots of home tasks live here, especially if you have children. Right? There's lots of pressure. I gotta get this done. I gotta get that done. And this pressure can come again, externally, a situation or another person, or internally. We can internally compel and pressure ourselves as well. I'm going to pause real quick here because this has been a lot of Hannah talking, and I think I might be talking too fast. What are you folks saying, like the relationship between consent, compliance, and pressure? Is this making sense, or is this just word soup right now?
Making a lot of sense, and it's awesome.
Yeah. Thank you. So let's keep going. Let's keep going on the spectrum here. So now we're getting into coercion, and coercion is very similar to pressure, except now I'm engaging in activity and it's not even reluctantly. I'm not giving my permission in any way. But this is coercion is when we engage in an activity through bribery, punishment, direct threats of physical violence or harm. And so this is pretty severe. And then the last one is force. And when we're using the correct terminology here, we're talking about physical force or the believable threat to physical force. So that's my parents picking up the 4-year-old version of Hannah and chucking her in the back of a Plymouth Fury. No seatbelts, by the way. It was the 70s. That is still considered this level of force. Force is where we're engaging in activity and we're not giving permission, of course, and we're doing it because of that physical violence or harm. And the whole reason of telling me, and now the reason for me telling you, is that the social worker wanted me to understand that as you move from left to right on this continuum, you are guaranteed two behaviors. If not one at a time, both at the same time is very common. So as you move from left to right, you should expect rebellion and resentment. And her message to me was, it's not sometimes going to happen. It's not occasionally you might see this. You are guaranteed to get rebellion and resentment if someone is behaving, acting, making a choice or engaging in an activity from any place, compliance, pressure, coercion, or force. So anything that is not consent. And that rebellion and resentment is normal. It's healthy, right? Think about, we're not going to pick on me so much. Think about a random 4-year-old, a random toddler at about 9. You tell that kid, look, I want you to sit down on your bottom and don't get back up again. Is that child's reaction going to be, sure, that sounds reasonable? Or are they going to lose their little minds?
They're going to lose their little puppy minds.
They're absolutely going to lose their minds. Rebellion and resentment, right? And that is a healthy, functioning child, right? Children do not have a filter and do not have a delay, so you get immediate feedback. If a child feels compelled, pressure, coerced, or forced, you're gonna know about that rebellion and resentment. My kid is 24 now. Around this, maybe the kid was maybe 6. One of the single biggest public freakouts that I had with that child was in the grocery store. I prevented them from smashing their head against a bag of spinach. I removed that as a choice from them, and that child lost it. I mean, you'd think that I was, shoving bamboo spikes at her fingernails. No, I removed a choice from this child. Even as adults, we still are subject to this rebellion and resentment. But now we have another kind of pressure, which is we are socialized, mostly socialized, some of us more than others. I'm not so socialized. But there's always a price to be paid. Anytime we are making a choice out of compliance, pressure, coercion, or force, there will be rebellion and resentment. Sometimes it takes decades or an entire lifetime for that to come back up again. Sometimes we just back it down, but the rebellion, resentment, it will always be there. So that's why sometimes you see somebody who's behaving like disproportionate to the situation at hand, and you're like, what is going on? Well, it's not disproportionate, not to them, right? So that rebellion and resentment, anytime, and I know I'm repeating myself and doing it intentionally, anytime we make a choice outside of consent, there will be a price to pay. And it does not matter to our brains whether or not somebody else or a situation is compelling, pressuring, coercing, or forcing us, or we are doing it to ourselves. Our brains don't have a way of understanding the difference and does not care. So social worker is also telling me that you're going to see some behaviors decline. So you're not just going to see rebellion or resentment go up, you will see these kinds of behaviors drop. One of them is long-term positive behavior change. I've used these slides for about 4 years now, and I've never changed this to long-term positive behavior change. And now I think I'm just going to leave it this way forever. So you will get long-term negative behavior change as you move from left to right. You will not get long-term positive behavior change. You will get short-term compliance, but you will not get long-term positive behavior change. And I think you probably imagine if there's one thing that my clients want, it's a long-term positive behavior change. You cannot get motivation or even willpower as you move from left to right. Our motivation and willpower is kind of fleeting anyways. But as you move through this continuum, the ability to keep ourselves motivated absolutely tanks. The ability to look for and take advantage of choice also drops. And being able to see choice deeply impacts our decision making. If we can't see choices, we're not going to be able to take advantage of them. And the last thing, and we can go back to the 4-year-olds with this, it removes our sense of autonomy, our sense of us feeling like a whole person. So when I told my child, when I removed the option for my child to turn a bag of spinach into mush with their noggin, I was basically telling that kid, you're not a real person. And that seems overly dramatic, but not to our brains, right? We do not like to have choice removed from us. We absolutely respond with rebellion and resentment because the message is, I'm not a real person, right? My autonomy has been removed. And the last thing that the social worker talked about is that as you move from left to right, you are guaranteed trauma, little t trauma, big T trauma, that kind of a thing. Sorry. I've lost it. I've clicked too many things. I think I even clicked one of your faces. I'm sorry if I did that. Sorry, I'm Zoom trauma. So as you move from left to right, you're guaranteed to have trauma. And again, this does not matter if somebody else or a situation is doing this to you or you are doing it to yourself. We have the ability to traumatize and re-traumatize ourselves all the time. So before I move on, what do you need clarification on about this continuum? What would you like to add?
Can I ask, you had mentioned that you're not planning on changing the phrase long-term change, but you had said, yes, your clients want long-term positive change, but as you move from left to right and you get more closer to force and being forced to do something, you're less likely to have long-term positive
Yes.
change, but you're more
Yeah.
likely to have long-term negative change. Is that what you meant?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
So I'm going to show you a picture. This is a little bit of implied animal on animal violence, so hang in there. So I want you to understand that what goes on in the back of our heads, at what's called the amygdala at the very back of our head, the oldest parts of our brain, almost not even a brain part, is the same thing that's happening at the back of this hyena's head. This hyena is surrounded by 5 wild dogs, and probably in the last few minutes of its life. Lots and lots and lots of things are removing choice from this hyena. The mud bank is removing choice from this hyena. Certainly the 5 wild dogs, potentially the photographer, depending on how close the photographer is. And this hyena is about to respond with some violence, right? And that is a proportional and reasonable response. But for some reason, when we feel pressured, compelled, coerced, forced, all of those things, we view those reactions, that rebellion and resentment, that kind of almost violence, as a personality defect. And what I hope you understand, you take nothing else away from our class this evening, is that this is a normal reaction to feeling like you have choice removed, like you're out of control. So to our brains, the limited control, if I have a removal or reduction of choice, I will perceive that as an immediate threat. An immediate threat is also perceived as limited control. And by the way, it doesn't have to be objectively that my choices have been removed. I just have to perceive that my choices have been removed. It doesn't take much for our brains to flip into this kind of mode. So here's what that kind of sounds like. So the hyena says, I feel like my life is out of control. And then the wild dogs are saying, let's work on your SMART goals. Focus on what's important. Read this book. Stick to your budget. Work harder. So even if the wild dogs are well-intentioned, this is still pressure, right? And even if we do this to ourselves, I need to work harder. We just need to actually stick to the budget. I just need to work smarter. I just need to buckle down. I just need to stop making stupid choices. That's still pressure. It still functions the same way. We still turn into the little hyena. Any attempts at correction or direction will be perceived as further removal of our control, because that's what it is. That's what we can remove choice from ourselves. Instructing, directing, correcting destroys autonomy. That's why this never happens. Instructing, directing, and correcting does not happen within Pacific Stoa. Whitney could probably attest to that. It's one of the first things we talk about. It's part of being trauma informed. And so this is what happened. We get judgment, right? Well, that's your choice. We're just trying to help. I thought you were serious. You're not being accountable. I can't help you if you don't take responsibility. So when we lash out with that rebellion and resentment, we're often met by judgment, not just from the external parts of our lives, but from ourselves as well. So the next question I get asked is like, cool, Hannah, whatever. So why do we even use restriction? It's because restriction has a pretty sweet sales pitch, right? Restriction says, I got just what you need, baby. So we're going to do two things. We're going to break out into groups here in just a minute. We're going to only take about 4 or 5 minutes. It's going to be super fast. Well, we don't have that many people. We could just stay here. Never mind. We're not going to break out into groups. We're going to just do it right here. So we're going to be asking 2 questions. And Whitney, are you okay to keep time? When I say go, we're looking for 5 minutes. I'm gonna basically shut up for a little bit, and I'd like you folks to kind of work on 2 questions. What is restrictions sales pitch? So what is it saying it's going to help you do? And the second question is, what is restriction trying to protect you from? So I'm going to drop out of slides so we can see everybody's faces. And I welcome you to go ahead and unmute and bring your faces up, but we're going to do 5 minutes starting now. You guys can talk. I'm still here. I mean, I'm not going anywhere, but what do you guys think?
Yeah, but you're
What's-
brushing your teeth.
I am brushing my teeth and looking skeptical. I was trying to drink a lot of tea. What do you think, folks? What is restriction sales pitch?
I can help you solve all those problems that you keep hearing about from other people.
What else?
So I think like it will save me money, and this is good things. Like when we save money, it's just like it's a good thing. So I'm
Mhm.
not wasting my money and things I will regret later.
Yep. Yes. Trying to prevent regret. Good. What else? Let's see. We got something in chat here. Caitlin says, a way to control anxiety about spending too much or saving too little. Yep. Absolutely.
Like restriction sales pitch is like, if you just sell me your soul, your autonomy, your humanity, then I will give you everything you ever wanted.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
will help you accomplish all your goals. And what's it trying to protect you from is like kind of like protect us from ourselves, or protect us from our impulses or our desires.
Yep. Exactly. What else, folks? We don't have to go the whole 5 minutes of just us sitting here staring at each other. Go ahead, Candace. Did you have something?
Yes, so it might be along Jem's lines is, you know, I can be whatever you need, but also I can solve all those problems, and I can insulate you from any consequences. I don't know. Yeah.
It's a pretty darn good sales pitch, right? Let's see what my slides say. Let's see how well I predicted your answers. I know that we didn't go the whole 5 minutes. That's okay. If you have something pop in your head in a minute about restriction sales pitch, just yell it out. So let's see. Not so breakout. So here's some of the things. We use restriction because it's available, right? We've heard it and reinforced it multiple times in our lives as the tool for getting from where we are to where we want to go. And that it comes along with that judgment, right? And it looks like everybody else is doing it right. Restriction tells us that it's the only way to keep us motivated, on track, and focused. Sometimes it does work inconsistently, but sometimes it does actually work. At what cost, right? It has been told us to be the right way to do things, and it's supposed to keep us safe from all the things that you just said. And it feels like we're doing something, anything to get to our goals. Can you think of anything else? Any of the my stuff plus your stuff? Anything else that restriction might be pitching us on? So restriction is trying to protect us from, well, this just drill down a little bit on this: laziness, temptations, distractions, being a bad person, whatever, all that kind of stuff. So now let's talk about, we're not going to do breakouts. We'll just sit here, we'll just do it again together. What are the actual outcomes of using restriction? So what are some things that are actually a result of using restriction? Thank you, Whitney.
Self-loathing and binging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What else?
Probably make me feel more responsible, and probably I am controlling myself more.
So more pressure?
Yeah, it's not a pressure. I will feel happy to control myself. Like it's go two ways. It's kind of pressure, but at the same time, it's give me satisfying. Like everything is in control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What else? What are some
So
other
it's an illusion.
outcomes?
It's
Yeah.
an illusion and we're blinded.
Yeah, it's part of the
So
sales
we
pitch.
can't
Yeah. Yeah.
see that it's not working.
Yeah. And it gets harder and harder and harder to use. Other thoughts about the actual outcomes of using restriction?
We've got a message on the chat from Caitlin. It says, I feel sad that I cannot do everything I want to do.
Yep. Yeah. Gotta get some of that regret, remorse in, which also functions as pressure as well. Thank you, Caitlin. Let's pop back into slides, see how the slides do. Oh, yes, I should have said this. We are evaluating using restriction as a strategy, not if you're doing restriction properly. We weren't worried about that, but you didn't pick. Good. So the actual outcome is it is a setup for failure. We do tend to evaluate ourselves rather than the strategy that we're using. Procrastination, hesitation, avoidance. We'll hold off on stuff. We'll, we won't pull the trigger on things when we otherwise would have. We end up feeling more out of control because we feel more pressure. And it reinforces that message. And I think it was Jem just a little bit ago. So it's kind of protecting us from ourselves, right? We need to be protected from ourselves because we can't be trusted. And it reinforces that message, I can't be trusted, over and over and over. So good outcomes. Any other outcomes that you folks can think that using restriction results in? That wasn't a good sentence. Anything else? So right about now, I get this question. Okay, yeah, Hannah, we get it, whatever. So what do we do instead? Right? What can we do instead of restriction? And very often the pushback I get is, okay, got it, Hannah, restriction bad. And so the opposite of restriction must be, willy-nilly spending, right? And it's not. We'll talk about what it is instead. But the opposite of restriction isn't just going crazy. So let's talk about quick win number one. And this tool is basically practicing self-observation without judgment. And I said quick, I didn't say easy. And this is a skill and sometimes takes some practice. So come with me in your little imaginations out into the jungle. And there's a scientist out there in the jungle, and the scientist is observing a wild animal. Would the scientist be trying to change that wild animal's behavior?
No.
Why not?
Well, it'd be unethical, but because the animal is just going to do what the animal is going to do and wouldn't understand why this human or why this observer is trying to change it.
Yeah.
And would probably get scared anyway.
That's true.
I'm sorry.
Very true. No, I apologize. Rakat, I saw that you unmuted. Did you have something to add?
It's just like she can't change his behavior, like the animal behavior. Like this is out of her control. She just watching and observing. That's all what she can do.
Yep. Yeah. So there's two reasons that the scientist would, if the scientist is a good ethical scientist, would not be trying to change the wild animal's behavior. The first one is absolutely ethical. It's just an animal, just let the animal be. And the second one is scientific. If the scientist tries to change the wild animal's behavior while the scientist is observing, scientist is going to get back messy data, and that's not going to help whatever experiment they're running, right? That's going to mess with their observations. It's going to mess with their data. Let's say the scientist, oh, there's a slide. The scientist is not going to try to change the wild animal's behavior. Let's say the scientist sort of determines that the scientist understands a baseline normal for the wild animal's behavior, and then watches the wild animal deviate away from that normal or baseline. Would the scientist try to correct or change the wild animal's behavior back again? Sounds like the same question, but it's not. So
I would say that even if the scientist had tried to affect change, and then the animal didn't change the animal's behavior on whatever was objectionable, the animal might persist in doing whatever it was that was objectionable. I mean, whatever objectionable is, but basically just the scientist watching the animal with just open mind and not trying to change anything, and just learning from the animal what is going on, and maybe learning some motivations or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Certainly the scientist is going to get curious. Like, that was interesting. I didn't see that behavior before. Were my assumptions about what was normal behavior correct? Is this a normal behavior I've just never seen before? Certainly scientist is going to ask some more questions. So let's say the scientist observes that the wild animal has eaten a large quantity of something disgusting. Would the scientist write down in their notebook, "Oh my God, that is the grossest, stupidest animal I've ever seen. So gross and stupid. Ew." Is that what the scientist would write down in their notebook?
No.
Probably not, right? Just going to stick to the nice, clean data. Judgments, value judgment, moral judgments, shame, guilt, remorse are not welcome here, right? There's no place in this naturalistic observation. Scientist is just going to observe and take notes. And this is the task. Well, let me ask, why do you think I'm telling you the silly story about a wild animal and swine? What do you think, scientist? What do you think I'm up to? My purpose here is that I want you to be both. I want you to be the scientist, and I also want you to be the wild animal. So you get the chance to have two perspectives. You can just do your wild animal thing, observe your spending behavior specifically, but observe your spending behavior without judgment, just as a scientist would. Ooh, that's interesting. There's an interesting pattern. When I feel stressed out, I do this. Right? Observing ourselves without judgment is a powerful tool for behavior change without trying to change our behavior, which sounds counterintuitive, but it's not. So that was the first quick win. Second one is we're going to practice evaluating systems, not if you're using the system correctly. And this becomes very, very important when we talk about budgeting. By the way, next month's class is on budgeting as a couple. So any system that you use, your bedtime routine, your dog walking routine, your budgeting system, I don't know, think of a system, you can use it for this. Let's say I give you a whole bunch of this lumber and I say, I would like you to build me a table. And you say, sure, Hannah, I will build you a table. And then I say, and the only tool that you have available is this hex wrench, this Allen wrench. Would you spend a whole bunch of time and energy beating on it with trying really hard to make it, and you say to yourself, I'm no quitter. I'm just going to force myself into this. I just have to take this seriously. I just have to really be serious about building this table out of this Allen wrench. Or would you hand me back the Allen wrench and say, this is the wrong tool for this, Hannah. What do you think?
I think that the only other thing that could happen is either hand it back to you and say, so what else you got? Or try to make it a sharp point and then spend an eternity trying to
Yep.
whittle away the ends
The
of the
chisel, yeah.
yeah. So
You'd probably wing it at my head and tell me, look, this is the wrong tool, right? So we are not evaluating how serious you are about building this table. We are evaluating the tool itself. And there are 4 questions that you can use to evaluate any system, routine, habit, ritual, mindset, strategy, any of them in any domain of your life. And there's going to be 4 questions. One of them we want a no answer to, and the other 3 we want a yes answer to. The first one, the one that we want a no answer to, is do I feel like garbage when I'm using this strategy? Right? If you're trying to use a system, a routine, a strategy, and you don't feel good while you're using it, or at least neutral, if you feel bad while you're using it, eventually you're going to stop trying, right? So do I feel like garbage while I'm using this strategy? That's the first one. And we would love for this to be a no. But if it's a yes, it's an indicator that the system you're using is not working. The second one is this strategy customized to me or my life? Right? And it makes perfect sense if you think about like your bedtime routine probably looks different than everybody else's bedtime routine because you're different people, right? Do you shower at night or shower in the morning, right? What are we doing with the facial moisturizers? So every system that you used, including a budget, including a spending plan, must be customized to your life. And if there's more than one person in your life besides you, needs to be customized to them too. And these 2 go along together. If a system is customized to your life, it's probably going to get easier to use. So let's say you've got a laundry system that you use, and it's easy and it's easy and it's easy. And all of a sudden that laundry system starts getting harder and harder and harder to use. That means that it's probably one, not customized. Something's wrong with that system and needs to be changed. So again, we are evaluating the system, not you. If a system is easy to use, we are likely to use it. And then the 4th one is just kind of again, we're looking for a yes here, but is it working? We are not looking for if you're doing it correctly. So if you can take a step back and look at the system at play and be like, that's not working, without evaluating yourself, then you'll be able to change that system. So this is the one kind of long-term practice that I would love to impart on you to be able to spend less without feeling restricted. And that's something called expected spending. The opposite of restriction isn't the willy-nilly. The opposite of restricted spending is expected spending. Expected spending means that we thoughtfully and intentionally spend without restriction. Let's do an example. So let's say you're the head of marketing for a Fortune 500 company. Every 2 years, you are given an allotment, a big pile of money to do your job for 2 years to do the job of marketing. And you are given for this 2 years, $10 million. But you decide instead of spending that $10 million, do we have something to chat? Okay. So we spent $10 million. That was your expected spending, right? But instead you choose to spend $2 million. You restrict. I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen. So I'm going to only spend $2 million. I'm going to lock it down. This is the $10 million is our expected spending, and the $2 million is our restricted. Right? Yep, too fast again with the, oh my gosh. So that's kind of the difference, right? The $10 million is expected. If you spent $2 million, do you think you would keep your job? You probably would not keep your job. Thank you, Whitney. So we're going to play a game to practice expected spending, and it's called target spending. And this is just a game. This is not a budget. So you can take this as light a heart as you possibly can. The purpose of practicing target spending is to practice, one, being aware of your spending. Very often we are not aware of where our money is going. It just goes. We're going to experiment, possibly, not required, but probably experiment with some tracking. And we're going to be reducing that impulse to restriction. The rules of target spending is that you'll pick a time frame, and it could be a one-off, like it could be this grocery shopping, this trip to the grocery store, or something no more than 2 weeks. If you try to play this one game for more than 2 weeks, it becomes a giant pain in the butt and nobody likes it. So a fairly short time frame is what we're looking for. We're going to have you pick a small portion of your flexible spending. So that this is all of your spending. We're looking for a fairly narrow wedge. We're not going to do groceries. That's a fairly big wedge, but you could do ice cream, cheese. Cheese is great. So we're looking for something flexible as well. So I assume you know what your rent is going to be. You know what your mortgage is going to be, your car insurance. So rent, car insurance, anything that's predictable is not welcome in this game. We want something that is a bit flexible. And it does not need to be something you felt like you need to restrict yourself from in the past, but it could be. That's not really, we don't need that either way. And then you're going to pick an exact dollar amount. No more, no less. That's the target part of the target spending. Your job is to hit that dollar amount exactly, bang on. So here's some examples that I've collected over the years. I'm going to spend $25 on coffee in the next 7 days. I'm going to spend $12 in the vending machine in the next 2 weeks. I'm going to spend $17 on fuzzy socks in the next week. That was probably me. And so the idea is not to spend up to $25, or I can't spend more than $12. The idea is that you hit that target exactly, no more, no less. So what do you think you might notice as you practice target spending? Or maybe a better question would be, what clarifications do you need about target spending?
So like, is that like budgeting? Like I have budgets for coffee or for ice
Mhm.
cream. So it's similar.
It is. This leads very quickly into budgeting, but this is not a budget. I really, it is like the little baby brother of a budget, but this is still just a game. And I want to keep it as a game so that we can practice and sort of get comfortable with that expected spending. But this idea that I'm expected to spend this much money is part of budgeting. It's part of an adaptive budget, at least.
We've got a
Excellent
message
question.
we've got a message
Okay.
in the chat.
Would you mind?
So Caitlin says, I might feel more free thinking. I have this much to spend rather than thinking I only have this much. Thank you.
Precisely. Thank you so much. There's a big difference between saying I can't spend more than $100 and I'm going to spend $100. Or even I can't spend more than $100 and I'm going to spend exactly $80. There's a big difference between those things. Jim, did you have something?
Yeah, I feel like this target spending like helps to visualize like getting what we want, and helps to visualize like going through the choice process. And that feels like a helpful visual instead of visualizing us going without.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We didn't talk about it too much, but what Jem is kind of talking about is something called scarcity mindset. And I really played with having this in tonight's class, but we only have an hour. So yeah, absolutely. It helps to kind of reset and reframe. So how will you keep track of your target spending? Let's say you do it more than once. Let's say it's a 2-week span. How will you keep track of the different times? How we keep track when we're playing target spending is a pretty good indicator about how we keep track when it's time to start tracking all of our spending. And what do you think you'll notice was the question I just asked and you've answered? And where are you feeling reluctance, hesitations, pushback on Hannah? Like, there's no way, Hannah, this is not going to work. Where are you feeling that resistance? We'll drop out. We didn't make it that far.
I feel like it doesn't sound like a fun game. Sounds like a not fun game.
It could be fun. I would say if it sounds like a not fun game, go with a smaller dollar amount, right? Like it doesn't need to be something extravagant. It feels sort of extravagant, and it really doesn't matter what the dollar amount or the flexible thing that you're spending on is, because what we're practicing is that expectation, that intentional thoughtfulness around spending rather than the quick knee-jerk reaction that is restriction. Yeah, you want to tell us more about why you feel like it would be not fun, Jim?
I don't know, just looking at a certain I think I would have to choose a small one, looking at a certain domain of my spending or involving tracking. And I don't know, I guess I would have some shame around it first. I would need to get through to even look at what I'm spending, to even track.
Yeah, go really small with this. Small, 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 small. This is a game. That way, it keeps this fairly light. Tracking is very optional on this. And when I'm working with clients, like the information that they come back with, if they tracked during the target spend game, gives me great information about what we'll do next. But you don't have to track at all. You can make this a one-off. You could walk into the grocery store next time you walk in and say to yourself, okay, I'm going to spend exactly $93. Exactly. Right. And we tend to do a whole lot more like calculations. We do like, okay, and then this, and then but there's all sorts of like weird little manipulations that we have to do with our, and then give things up and put things back in. And yeah, we spend a lot more time noodling on these things and being much more intentional when we practice expected spending. Whereas if I say I can't spend more than $93, that immediately puts my brain into scarcity mindset. I'm losing. So yes, this is just a game. And if you want to add a fun little element to the end of this, as you play the target spending game, as you complete it, you can ask yourself, did I die? And that absolutely helps our brains like, okay, this is just a silly game. This is not a budget. And it also doesn't matter, right? So if I say I'm going to spend exactly $93 on my grocery shopping and I spend $97 or $84, does that really matter? Not even a little bit, right? It does not matter. So we're coming up on time. I would love for you folks to unmute, or if you can, Caitlin, sorry, and kind of, I would love for some feedback if you have any. My ask would be, what is the one thing that you were surprised about that we talked about tonight? If there was a surprise.
Thank you. This is very useful for me. Like, yeah, I really appreciate all the information. They are all like useful and informative. However, probably I have difficulties with doing calculations. Like my time in the grocery store, is my fun time. Like this is like when this part of the day I feel happy with buying things, give me this happiness. And when I add calculation to that, it will be not happy anymore. So yeah, but
So try it with something else.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, thank you very much. I have to leave now. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.